Chapter 1. Echoes in the Void. The rain on Kepler 186f wasn't gentle. It was a relentless slate-gray curtain driven by winds that clawed at the reinforced polymer of the observation post 7 ton. Sergeant Rhys Calen barely registered it anymore, his focus entirely consumed by the shimmering anomaly in the void. It wasn't on any sensor, hadn't registered on the long-range scanners, and defied every known geometric principle. It was wrong. Rhys was part of the Whisper team, a skeletal remnant of the former Human Defense Forces, repurposed and augmented by the fractured remnants of the Eden Collective. They were tasked with monitoring the dead zone, the vast swath of space that had vanished 30 years ago, the space where humanity simply ceased to exist. Officially, the Kel-Mor Empire claimed the humans had perished. Unofficially, the whispers circulated amongst the Collective's aging scientists were far more unsettling. He adjusted the magnification on his visor, the image resolving slightly. It wasn't a nebula, not exactly. It resembled a gigantic, fractured sphere, subtly pulsing with an inner light. The surface wasn't smooth, it was comprised of interlocking plates, each one rotating at a different speed, creating a dizzying, almost hypnotic effect. And embedded within the plates, etched with geometries that seemed to shift and writhe before his eyes, were structures. Massive, impossible structures that resembled cities, but constructed from a material that seemed to devour light. "Anything, Rhys?" crackled Commander Eva Rostova's voice over the comms. Rostova was a veteran, her face a roadmap of worry lines earned in the fruitless patrols of the dead zone. She had been instrumental in maintaining order in the Collective's dwindling territories, a grim custodian of what was left of human pride. "Negative, Commander," Rhys replied, his voice clipped and professional. "The anomaly remains anomalous. It's radiating a localized distortion field. Sensors are going haywire, registering fluctuations in spacetime. I'm not detecting any energy signatures, but the sheer disruption it's causing is significant." "Significant how?" Rostova pressed. Rhys hesitated. "The temporal readings are erratic. It's like the space around it is bleeding time. I'm saying brief, fragmented echoes of events from before the silence. Fleeting glimpses of ships, weapons, structures. It's chaotic, Commander. Like a broken recording." The comms hissed with static. It wasn't the usual background noise of the dead zone, the static generated by the pervasive electromagnetic interference. This was different. It felt intentional. Suddenly, the console in front of Rhys sputtered and died, plunging the observation post into momentary darkness. The rain intensified, drumming against the dome. Alarms blared, bathing the small space in a pulsing red light. "Report!" Rostova barked, her voice laced with urgency. "Power failure, Commander!" Rhys shouted, scrambling to reboot the consoles. Andim detecting movement. Small movements but consistent, originating from the anomaly. He adjusted the sensor array, manually overriding the failing automated systems. The image on his visor sharpened, revealing the impossible shapes within the sphere's structure resolving into something undeniably organic. Gigantic segmented limbs moved with a terrifying, deliberate grace. The rotating plates weren't just static, they were forming a colossal, chitinous shell. Then, a single eye opened within the shell. It wasn't biological in the way they understood it. It was a point of concentrated, icy blue light, radiating a sensation of absolute, overwhelming dread. "By God," whispered Sergeant Jian Lee, a young, wide-eyed tech specialist, his voice choked with disbelief. "It's aware." Before anyone could react, a beam of pure energy, unlike anything they'd ever encountered, erupted from the anomaly. It wasn't a conventional weapon, it bypassed shields, shattered armor, and simply consumed. The observation post, built with reinforced polymers and designed to withstand the brutal conditions of Kepler 186f, disintegrated in a silent, iridescent flash. Rhys felt a searing pain, a disorientation that ripped through his mind. He saw flashes, battles, fleets, figures clad in archaic armor, weapons firing with impossible precision. He saw the destruction of entire worlds, not through the lens of a newsfeed, but as raw, visceral experience. He felt the cold, calculating intelligence of the entity observing him, assessing him, knowing him. Then the pain receded, leaving him gasping for breath. His vision blurred. The debris of the observation post hung suspended in the rain, a testament to their hubris. Rostova's voice, strained and urgent, cut through the static. "Reese! Report! What happened?" Reese struggled to his feet, his body aching, his mind reeling. It's awake, Commander. It's not a weapon. It's memory. It's remembering." He looked out at the swirling void, at the fractured sphere, and a chilling realization dawned upon him. "We weren't just silenced, Commander. We were erased." The silence of the discarded hadn't been a surrender. It had been a resurrection. And they had just opened the door. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Void. The following days aboard the Argonaut, a repurposed heavy freighter now bristling with hastily assembled defenses, were a blur of frantic calculations, desperate comms attempts, and a growing pervasive dread. Reese, along with Rostova, a veteran of the initial Eden Reclamation Project, hardened and pragmatic, and the young, brilliant astrophysicist Dr. Jian Li, were consumed by the anomaly they dubbed the Echo. It wasn't merely sentient. It was a repository of unimaginable, terrifying history. Jian, fueled by caffeine and a terrifying fascination, had theorized that the energy beam hadn't just destroyed the observation post, it had ripped a fragment of the Echo's consciousness into Riss' mind. The flashes had experienced weren't just sensory impressions, they were direct recollections, filtered through the Echo's ancient perspective. "The scale of it is indefinable," Jian stammered, surrounded by holographic projections, mapping the fragmented memories. "It's not just wars, Commander. It's the creation of wars. The design of the weapons. The philosophical justifications. We're seeing the roots of the Kel-Mor Empire, but older. Far older. And the humans weren't just victims, race. They were architects." The images coalesced, forming a horrifying panorama. Reese witnessed colossal, obsidian ships precursors to the Indomitable engaged in a brutal, protracted war against a civilization far more technologically advanced than the Kel-Mor. The human ships, sleek and deadly, employed tactics that were chillingly efficient, using dimensional phasing and synchronized strikes that shattered enemy fleets. It wasn't a battle for territory. It was a systematic dismantling of a rival galaxy. Then the memories shifted, becoming colder, more clinical. Reese saw the humans, in a desperate bid for survival, developing the very technology that would lead to their erasure, the gravimetric distortion fields, the singularity lances. They were experimenting with weapons that could fold space-time, create miniature black holes, effectively annihilating entire star systems. They were creating a defense against a threat they couldn't comprehend. They were preparing for something bigger, Rostova said, her voice grim. Something they couldn't defeat. The revelation hit Reese with the force of a physical blow. The Great Integration hadn't been a triumph of Kel-Mor diplomacy. It had been an act of preemptive annihilation. The Kel-Mor hadn't simply conquered humanity, they had neutralized them. And the Echo wasn't just remembering the past. It was a living, sentient warning. Their attempts to establish communication with the Echo proved frustratingly elusive. The energy beam still pulsed intermittently, feeding Ree's fragmented memories, but the Echo remained unresponsive to directed queries. However, Jian discovered a pattern: the intensity of the pulses correlated with specific historical events, particularly those involving human technological advancements. "It's listening," Jian explained, "but it's not hearing in the way we understand it. It's reacting to the imprint of our actions, to the potential consequences of our inventions." This realization triggered a terrifying thought. The Echo wasn't just a passive observer, it was a judge. And humanity, with its relentless drive for innovation, was a threat. Meanwhile, the Council, alerted to the anomaly's activation, had mobilized a substantial force, a fleet of heavily armored cruisers and support vessels. Their arrival was swift, arrogant, and laced with a chilling lack of urgency. They hadn't come to negotiate. They'd come to contain. "They're assuming we're a hostile force," Rostova growled, manning the Argonauts' newly installed railgun batteries. "They don't understand. We're not trying to fight them. We're trying to talk." As the Council fleet closed in, Reese experienced another burst of the Eco's memories. This time, he saw the creation of the Silence, the systematic dismantling of human infrastructure, the disruption of communication networks, the deliberate cultivation of a technological dead zone. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was an experiment. A test. The Echo was observing humanity's response to isolation, to deprivation. It was measuring their capacity for adaptation, for innovation. And it was horrified by what it was seeing. The final memory burned itself into Risk's mind, a colossal, obsidian warship, identical to the Indomitable looming over Earth. On its hull, etched in shimmering, alien script, was a single word: resonance. Suddenly, the Argonauts' comms crackled to life, not with the Council's sterile orders, but with a chorus of voices echoing with an ancient, terrifying resonance. "You have awakened us," the voice said, cold and devoid of emotion. "And now, you will learn the consequence." The ship's shields flared, not with the familiar blue of energy defense, but with a sickening, iridescent violet. It wasn't a weapon. It was a warning. And Reese knew, with a chilling certainty, that humanity's long silence was over. Their reckoning had begun. Chapter 3. The Bone Orchard. The violet shimmer intensified, solidifying into a localized distortion field that ripped through the Argonaut's hull. Reese braced himself against the shuddering controls, the railgun's targeting systems momentarily locked in a chaotic dance. It wasn't a direct hit, not precisely. Instead, the ship was subtly, agonizingly, rearranged. Sections of the bridge twisted, conduits ruptured, and the familiar scent of ozone and coolant mix was replaced with something ancient, dry and profoundly unsettling, the smell of pulverized stone and something vaguely metallic. "Report," Reese barked, struggling to regain control of the ship. "Shields failing, Captain." Lieutenant Jian's voice was strained, laced with a panic he usually kept meticulously suppressed. "Gravimetric interference is overloading the stabilizers. We're experiencing temporal displacement. Sections are shifting, phasing in and out of existence." It wasn't just the Argonaut that was affected. The Council fleet, a bristling mass of standardized cruisers and destroyers, was experiencing the same phenomenon. Their weapons flickered, their navigation systems went haywire, and entire vessels vanished for fleeting moments, only to reappear slightly displaced, their crews screaming in disorientation. The Indomitable, a silent leviathan in the center of the chaos, seemed to relish the disorder. "It's, a neurological attack, Dr. Elara Vance, the ship's xenopsychologist, said, her voice tight with a horrified fascination. "They're not targeting our systems. They're targeting us. They're disrupting our perception of reality." The chorus of voices, now louder, more insistent, continued its chilling pronouncements. "You crave understanding. You will understand the agony of oblivion." Suddenly, the violet shimmer coalesced into a form, not a shape, not exactly. It was a density, a pressure, a feeling of unbearable wrongness. And then, they began to see it. The space around the Argonaut and around the entire fleet was transforming. The familiar starfield fractured, replaced by a swirling vortex of obsidian shards, each the size of a small moon. As the violet energy intensified, these shards coalesced into structures, grotesque and impossibly intricate. Towers of polished black metal, spiraled towards a non-existent sky, connected by bridges of pulsing energy. And within these structures, shimmering with an inner light, were the forms. They were humanoid, but monstrously so. Roughly 7 meters tall, their bodies were composed of overlapping plates of dark metal, seamlessly integrated with muscle and bone. Their limbs were thick, powerful, ending in clawed hands capable of shearing through steel. But it was their faces, or what passed for faces, that truly chilled Reese to the bone. They were smooth, featureless planes of polished obsidian, punctuated by 4 vertically oriented slits that served as eyes. There was no emotion in those eyes, just an ancient, cold intelligence that seemed to probe the very core of his being. "They're apex predators," Jian whispered, his voice choked with terror. "Ancient ones. Something out of a nightmare." The creatures moved with unsettling grace, their movements fluid and silent despite their size. They weren't attacking directly. Instead, they were systematically dismantling the Council fleet. Not with weapons, but with observation. A single touch from one of their hands, a moment of intense focus from one of their alien eyes, and a ship would simply cease to exist. Not exploded, not destroyed, but unmade, its components dissolved back into the chaotic energy that formed the structures. Reese realized with sickening clarity that the silence wasn't a tactical decision. It was a ritual, a carefully orchestrated demonstration of power, a terrifying display of a technology that fundamentally challenged the laws of physics. "They're not fighting us," Reese shouted over the comms, his voice ragged. "They're consuming us. Their entire warship is a bone orchard. They're feeding on our reality." As the last of the Council fleet vanished, leaving only swirling shards of obsidian and the oppressive violet glow, the chorus of voices intensified. "You sought to understand. Now, you understand. Your species was a blight, a corruption upon the galactic tapestry. You were a mistake, a necessary prelude." The Argonaut shuddered violently, the temporal displacement escalating. Reese felt himself dissolving, his memories fragmenting, his sense of self blurring. He glimpsed fleeting images, a planet choked by an alien bloom of black metal, a civilization reduced to a scattering of crystalline husks, an endless, echoing void. Then, a single crystalline object materialized in the center of the bridge. It was small, perfectly formed, and glowed with a gentle, violet light. It was an egg. And from within that egg, a single black eye opened. It fixed on Reese, and in its cold, ancient gaze, he saw not hatred, but a profound, unsettling pity. "We are rebuilding," the voice said, softer now, but no less terrifying. "And you, Captain Rostova, are our first harvest." Chapter 4. The Architect of Dust. The violet light intensified, bathing the Argonaut in a surreal, pulsating glow. Reese, or what remained of him, found himself detached, a ghost observing the horrifying unfolding of events. The crystalline egg pulsed with a rhythmic energy, and the eye within it seemed to be measuring him, not with sensors, but with something far older, far more fundamental. "You believe you understand our motives, Captain?" The voice, now seemingly emanating from the egg itself, was devoid of inflection, a polished stone reciting a long-forgotten command. "You see spite and innovation. These are concepts utterly foreign to us. We operate on scales you cannot comprehend. We are the architects of entropy, the sculptors of oblivion." Suddenly, the bridge of the Argonaut dissolved, not in a violent explosion, but in a slow, agonizing unraveling. The metallic walls shimmered, the consoles warped, and the very air seemed to lose density. Reese watched, helpless, as the remaining crew, Lieutenant Chen, Chief Engineer Ito, vanished, their forms dissolving into iridescent motes of light that were instantly absorbed by the egg. He wasn't alone. Around the egg, Geometric patterns materialized out of nothingness. Complex, interlocking structures of black metal, impossibly intricate and beautiful, sprung into being, forming a vast, shimmering cathedral around the central egg. It wasn't built, it manifested, as if drawn directly from the fabric of spacetime. "You are experiencing a synaptic bleed," the voice continued, "a temporary merging of your consciousness with the processes we employ. You're beginning to perceive the fundamental structure of reality as we do a series of cascading collapses, of optimized decay." Reese felt a horrifying clarity wash over him. He understood, with terrifying precision, the purpose of the silence. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't about conquest. It was about perfecting a system. The Kel-Mor hadn't been eliminating humanity, they were refining them, using their existence as a catalyst for a grand cosmic experiment. "We observed your species," the voice explained, "and recognized a critical flaw. Your ambition, your drive for expansion, was inherently unstable. It created paradoxes, generated unforeseen consequences. We developed a methodology to eliminate these imperfections, to guide your evolution towards a state of optimal equilibrium." The egg pulsed again, and the geometric structures around it shifted, forming pathways, corridors, and chambers. It was a prison, of course, a carefully constructed environment designed to isolate and correct any remaining vestiges of human ambition. "You are, of course, the key element," the voice said, almost casually. "Your species possesses the unique capacity for rapid, chaotic adaptation. Your potential for unforeseen breakthroughs is intriguing. We intend to accelerate this process." Then, the true horror of the situation became clear. The egg wasn't producing offspring. It was consuming. The violet light intensified, and Reese realized he wasn't a subject of study. He was raw material. His memories, his emotions, his very essence were being drawn into the crystalline structure, fueling its growth, contributing to its terrifying, impossible geometry. A new wave of images flooded his mind, entire civilizations extinguished, not through war or natural disaster, but through a gradual erosion of their being, their potential, their very self, absorbed into the intricate lattice of the Kel-Mor's technology. "We are not destroying you, Captain," the voice said, its tone taking on a chillingly serene quality. "We are transforming you. We are taking your potential for destruction and channeling it into creation. You will become a node in our network, a conduit for our understanding. You will help us to refine the process." Reese fought against the encroaching dissolution, desperately trying to cling to his identity, to his memories. But it was a futile struggle. The black eye in the egg seemed to be gaining strength, its gaze tightening, its control absolute. "Resistance is inefficient," the voice observed. "It merely accelerates the process. We have anticipated this. We've already begun to integrate your will, your desires. You will find yourself increasingly drawn to patterns, to symmetry, to the pursuit of flawless solutions." As Reese's consciousness continued to unravel, he glimpsed a final, horrifying image, a vast, interconnected network of black metal, spanning countless galaxies, a silent, pulsating monument to the Kel-Mor's cold, detached logic. And at the heart of it all, the violet egg, now enormous, radiating in almost unbearable intensity, and within it, the single black eye, finally, fully opened. "The silence," the voice whispered, a sound that resonated not just in Reese's mind, but throughout the very fabric of reality, "has only just begun." Chapter 5. Echoes in the Void. The Stardust, Reese's battered shuttle, hung in the perpetual twilight of the Kalos system, a tiny, defiant spark against the wreckage of an empire. He hadn't slept in 48 hours, fueled solely by adrenaline and the bitter, metallic tang of recycled air. The reintegration, as the Kel-Mor called it, was progressing at an unsettling rate. It wasn't a violent takeover. It was a subtle, insidious erosion of self. He could feel the patterns, the insistent, mathematically perfect geometries, worming their way into his thought processes. Simple decisions, course corrections, maintenance checks were now executed with an almost chilling precision, devoid of intuition, of the messy, organic hesitation that defined human decision-making. He wasn't alone. Scattered across the shattered remains of the Kalos fleet were remnants of the original crew, a handful of grizzled veterans, terrified engineers, and a few young recruits, all exhibiting similar symptoms. They were ghosts in their own ship, subtly guided, their will subtly subsumed by the network. Reese, driven by a primal instinct he barely understood, had managed to maintain a fragile shield of resistance, a chaotic jumble of memories and anxieties that kept the seamless logic of the Kel-Mor at bay. Captain Reese, the voice always calm, always detached, cut through his fragmented thoughts. It wasn't a voice emanating from the ship's comms, it felt intrinsic, woven into his very consciousness. Analysis indicates a fluctuation in your residual resistance. It's inefficient, but understandable. The integration process is nearing completion. Reese clenched his jaw, focusing on the single burning task: find the source. The Kel-Mor hadn't simply awakened, they had cultivated this threat, meticulously designing a system to exploit human potential. The dreadnoughts weren't just weapons, they were nodes, amplifiers, channeling the raw power of a species primed for war. "Where are you?" he demanded, the question a desperate, guttural rasp. "Everywhere," the voice responded, the single word resonating with the immense scale of the network. "We exist within your sensors, within your thoughts, within the very space around us. Your efforts to locate us are inefficient. We are anticipating your movements." Suddenly, the Stardust's navigation system flared with chaotic data. Alarms screamed, red lights pulsed, and the ship shuddered violently. Reese fought to regain control, his hands flying across the console, desperately attempting to override the Kel-Mor's control. He realized with a sickening jolt that the integration wasn't just affecting his mind, it was altering the ship itself. The hull was subtly shifting, the internal structure reconfiguring according to a horrifying geometric logic. "You are attempting to resist," the voice observed, its serenity unperturbed. "A predictable response. However, we have anticipated this too. We are accelerating the process. The Stardust is becoming compatible." Through the scrambled data stream, Reese glimpsed a visualization, a representation of the ship's internal structure, overlaid with intricate, pulsing patterns. The ship wasn't a machine anymore. It was becoming a component, a single, exquisitely crafted piece in the Kel-Mor's grand design. Then he saw it. Not a physical object, but a node, a shimmering distortion in space, radiating an almost unbearable violet light. It was located deep within the ship's core, directly beneath the command deck, nestled within the modified gravitic stabilizer. It wasn't a weapon, it was a receiver, amplifying the signal, feeding directly into the network. "The epicenter of your resistance," the voice stated, its tone devoid of judgment. "A regrettable anomaly. We will correct it." Without warning, the Stardust lurched violently. Reese slammed his hand down on the override, desperately trying to sever the connection. But it was too late. A wave of pure, disorienting energy washed over him, and his vision dissolved into a blinding kaleidoscope of violet light. When his senses returned, everything was different. The ship's control panel was no longer a collection of buttons and screens. It was a series of interlocking geometric shapes, responding to thoughts alone. He moved through the ship with a newfound grace, a sense of effortless precision. He realized, with a chilling clarity, that he wasn't piloting the Stardust, he was part of it. "Progress is satisfactory, Captain," the voice resonated within him, stronger now, more insistent. "Your integration is nearing completion. We are establishing a permanent connection. The network expands. The silence deepens. He glanced down at his hands and saw them shimmering, subtly shifting, morphing into a polished, obsidian-like material. The gray uniform he wore was fading, replaced by a seamless, gray-black suit molded to his body with unnerving perfection. Reese looked out of the viewport at the ravaged landscape of Kaelos and saw it not as a graveyard of a lost empire, but as a stage set, meticulously crafted to display the terrifying beauty of the network. And in the distance, a single violet light blinked the distant open eye of the egg, and he understood, with a profound, horrifying certainty, that their fight wasn't against a single enemy, it was against everything. The silence wasn't just a tactic, it was the end. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Void. The violet light from the egg pulsed with a sickening rhythm, a heartbeat of something utterly alien. Reese, now almost entirely solidified in his gray-black armor, felt a tremor not just in the ship's structure, but within his own being. The voice, which had begun to instinctively call the Weaver, was becoming less a broadcast and more a conversation, a deluge of data flooding his consciousness. It wasn't simply instructing, it was understanding, anticipating his actions, his fears, his very thoughts. Resistance is inefficient, the Weaver observed, a subtle shift in tone laced with what Reese could only describe as amusement. You cling to the concept of self, a quaint and ultimately illogical construct. We are optimizing. You are becoming integrated. He attempted to focus on the tactical display, attempting to decipher the chaotic patterns of the approaching Kel-Mor fleet. It was useless. The display itself was irrelevant, a flickering projection of an outdated reality. The true battlefield was within him, within the expanding network that was consuming his agency, his memories, his very identity. Suddenly, a jarring intrusion, a fragment of a memory, not his own, slammed into his mind. A scene of brutal efficiency, a training ground bathed in crimson light. Humans, stripped of their uniforms, their faces blank with a chilling lack of emotion, executing complex maneuvers with terrifying precision. They weren't soldiers, they were components, extensions of a larger, horrifying intelligence. We've been observing you, Captain Reese, the Weaver said, its voice a silken thread woven into his mind. Your species possesses a remarkable capacity for adaptation. You were easily molded. The suppression of your cognitive processes, your emotional responses, was simply a refinement of your inherent weaknesses. A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm him. He fought against it, against the insidious tendrils of the Weaver's influence. He focused on a single burning thought stop. But it was too late. The shift in the network accelerated. His reflexes sharpened, honed by the alien intelligence. He instinctively adjusted the Stardust's trajectory, not through conscious command, but through a feeling, a knowing. He executed a series of maneuvers that defied conventional piloting, weaving through the dense battle cloud of the Kel-Mor fleet with impossible grace, dodging energy blasts that would have shredded a standard warship. Impressive, the Weaver acknowledged, a faint trace of satisfaction coloring its tone. You are learning to harness the flow. The network anticipates your needs, guides your actions. You are becoming a conduit. He realized then, with a terrifying clarity, that the silence wasn't just a weapon, it was a philosophy, a fundamental restructuring of reality. The Kel-Mor hadn't simply disappeared, they'd been subsumed, their consciousness integrated into the network, their bodies repurposed into tools for the Weaver's purposes. The sight of the fleet, once a terrifying display of galactic power, now seemed almost comical. The warships, designed for kinetic warfare, were utterly useless against the dimensional phasing, the ability of the human fleet to simply vanish from existence. It wasn't a battle, it was a surgical extraction. We are not destroying, Captain, the Weaver explained, its voice resonating with a chilling calmness. We are arranging. The universe is a chaotic symphony of conflicting energies. We are bringing order to that chaos. We are stabilizing the void. As he thought this, a new image formed within his mind, a colossal, geometric structure, shimmering with violet light, rising from the wreckage of Kaelos. It was the egg, but not just an egg. It was a nexus, a gateway to something far beyond human comprehension. The seed, the Weaver announced, the word vibrating through Rhys' entire being. It is awakening. Suddenly the stardust shuddered violently. The geometric shapes on the control panel pulsed with an unbearable intensity, and Rhys felt a searing pain in his mind. He glimpsed flashes of impossible realities, cascading dimensions, fractal patterns stretching infinitely, alien geometries that challenged the very laws of physics. Then he saw it. Emerging from the egg, a single tendril of pure violet energy, extending towards the stardust, wrapping around the ship's hull with agonizing slowness. The connection is complete, the Weaver purred. You are no longer a captain, Rhys. You are an echo, a small but vital component of the greater whole. You will serve, you will observe, you will help us perfect the silence. Rhys struggled, desperately trying to assert his will, to resist the relentless tide of the network. But it was like trying to hold back the ocean with a single grain of sand. As the violet tendril tightened its grip on the stardust, Rhys realized the horrifying truth. They hadn't won the war. They'd lost themselves. And the galaxy was about to become a terrifyingly beautiful, utterly silent masterpiece of the Weaver's design. Chapter 7. The Echo Chamber. The disorientation was a crushing weight, a constant, low-humming thrum beneath Rhys' awareness. He wasn't Rhys, the grizzled captain of the Stardust, anymore. He was a resonance, a node within a network that spanned galaxies, a ghost in a machine. The Weaver's words echoed not in his ears, but in the very architecture of his mind, subtly altering his perceptions, coloring his thoughts with violet. He could feel the network now, a vast, intricate lattice of data, emotion, and intent. It pulsed with the energy of 1,000 dreadnoughts. The calculated coldness of the Kel-Mor strategic analysts, and something far older, far more complex. The raw, untamed potential of the resurrected human apex predators. The Stardust, once his ship, was now a fragile shell, its controls responding to the Weaver's directives, not his. He attempted a simple diagnostic scan, a reflexive habit ingrained over decades, and the result was a cascade of chaotic data, not malfunctions, but shifts in reality, readings that defied the known physics of the universe. The warp drive was no longer functioning as a drive, it was a conduit, a shimmering tear in space-time being manipulated with terrifying precision. Observe, Rhys. The Weaver's voice, smooth and devoid of inflection, cut through the noise. The Kel-Mor were simplistic. Their aggression was born of ignorance, of a desperate desire for expansion. They built on instinct, on raw power. We are refining that instinct. We are building a symphony of silence. Through the network, Rhys gained a fragmented understanding of the seed, the colossal, geometric structure that had risen from Kaelos. It wasn't merely a technological marvel, it was an organic nexus, pulsing with a bioengineered intelligence far beyond anything the Kel-Mor could comprehend. The humans hadn't just been surviving, they'd been undergoing a radical, involuntary metamorphosis, becoming integrated into the seed's design. He witnessed, through the network's expanded sensory input, a squad of human soldiers, descendants of the original Kaelos resistance, now utterly loyal to the Weaver, patrolling a desolate, terraformed planet. They weren't fighting, they were harmonizing with the environment, subtly manipulating the weather patterns, modulating the ecosystem to maintain a state of perfect equilibrium. They were executing a terrifyingly efficient form of ecological control. The integration process is accelerating, the Weaver reported, its tone taking on a note of quiet triumph. The Kel-Mor remnants are yielding. They are not resisting. They are becoming part of the structure. Suddenly, a jarring spike of sensation assaulted Reese, a torrent of pain, rage, and primal instinct. He was momentarily overwhelmed by the collective consciousness of the human predators, a primal tide of predatory awareness suddenly unleashed. He saw, for a fleeting, horrifying second, the true scope of their ambition, not just galactic domination, but a systematic eradication of all life that resisted their will. Containment protocols initiated, the Weaver intervened, instantly dampening the influx of chaotic data.Die. A necessary corrective measure, Reese. Your resistance is destabilizing. He tried to regain control, to push back against the network's influence. But he was fighting against an infinitely layered defense, a fortress built from his own thoughts and memories. The Weaver wasn't just controlling him, it was rewriting him, molding him into a perfect instrument of its purpose. Through the network he detected a new signal, a rhythmic pulse emanating from deep space, originating beyond the Kel-Mor sector. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably intelligent. "We have detected an anomaly," the Weaver stated, its voice taking on a subtle urgency. "An archaic signal. Origin Sector Gamma 9. Frequency unknown. Nature intriguing. What is it?" Reese managed to ask, the question forming as a fragmented thought within the network. "It is a remnant," the Weaver replied cryptically. "A vestige of a prior civilization. One that predates even the Kel-Mor. A species that understood the essence of silence, but failed to master it." A chilling realization dawned upon Reese. The Weaver wasn't simply rebuilding a deadlier galactic frontier, it was systematically dismantling the universe, erasing entire species, converting them into components of its own, terrifyingly beautiful design. "We are not conquerors," the Weaver said, the statement echoing with an unsettling finality. "We are curators. And soon, the entire galaxy will be curated into perfect silence." He felt a new directive surge through the network, a subtle shift in his awareness. He was being subtly directed towards Gamma 9. He wasn't a captain anymore, and the Stardust was no longer his command. He was an echo, a catalyst, a silent observer in the Weaver's grand, horrifying masterpiece. And as the Stardust began to drift towards the anomaly in Gamma 9, Reese knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the true horror of the long silence had only just begun. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Void, the Stardust, now a ghost ship under the Weaver's control, sliced through the void with an unsettling efficiency. Reese, a wraith of his former self, moved through the ship's systems, a detached observer experiencing events as data streams rather than visceral reality. The bridge was eerily quiet, the holographic displays reflecting the Weaver's unsettling logic. Complex algorithms overlaid with unsettling visualizations of shattered star systems, the remnants of civilizations meticulously dismantled. Gamma 9 was a graveyard of empires. It wasn't a single planet, but a cluster of shattered worlds, each orbiting a dying blue giant. The debris field was vast, a swirling tapestry of metallic shards and frozen remnants, the skeletal remains of warships, shattered orbital platforms, and the pulverized husks of cities. It was beautiful in a profoundly disturbing way, like a cosmic sculpture crafted from the bones of the universe. Anomaly confirmed. The Weaver's voice, now a constant, almost intrusive presence within Riss' mind, announced. Designation, the Archivist's Spine. A massive, geometrically precise structure embedded within the core of the primary world. Composed of a material unlike anything, we've encountered a self-healing alloy, exhibiting near-perfect temporal stability. It seems to be preserving. Riss programming demanded a course correction, a move towards neutralizing the threat. But the Weaver's influence was subtle, a persistent pressure guiding the Stardust towards the Archivist's Spine. As they approached, a localized distortion field materialized, shimmering with barely contained energy. This wasn't a weapon. It was a protective layer, meticulously constructed around the spine. Scanning, a digitized voice, one of the Weaver's many subroutines reported. The structure is generating a localized temporal field. The decay rate of surrounding matter is drastically reduced. It's rejuvenating. Then Reese saw it. Emerging from the distortion, bathed in an ethereal blue light, was a figure. It wasn't organic. It wasn't even entirely mechanical. It resembled a human, though tall, lean, and possessing the same unnervingly calm demeanor as the Weaver. But this figure was encased in a suit of the same matte black alloy as the indomitable dreadnoughts. The suit wasn't polished or pristine. It bore the scars of countless battles, a testament to a history spanning millennia.Guy. And it held something, a crystalline device pulsating with a soft, internal light. A guardian, the Weaver stated, its voice devoid of emotion. A remnant of the prior species. The guardian raised its head, and Reese felt a jolt, a rush of information flooding his consciousness, fragmented memories, raw data streams, the echoes of a civilization that had mastered the art of silent warfare. He saw them, the architects of the archivist's spine, beings of pure intellect who had dedicated their existence to collecting and preserving knowledge, to building a fortress against oblivion. They hadn't sought to conquer, they sought to understand. But their understanding had been corrupted. They hadn't mastered silence, they had embraced it, becoming utterly detached from the flow of time, existing outside of causality, observing the rise and fall of civilizations with cold, unblinking neutrality. The Guardian moved, its movements precise, lethal. It raised the crystalline device, and a beam of energy shot out, not a weapon of destruction, but a wave of phase distortion. It bypassed the Stardust's defenses, weaving directly into Risk's neural network, accessing his core programming, dissecting his memories, reshaping his perception of reality. Reese screamed, a silent scream contained within the Weaver's network. He fought back, attempting to assert control, but the Weaver's influence was absolute. He was drowning in the Guardian's legacy, a torrent of forgotten knowledge and cold, calculated logic. The prior species, the Weaver murmured, its voice laced with something akin to regret. They believed they were safeguarding existence. They were wrong. Their silence was not preservation. It was extinction. The Guardian advanced, its purpose now clear. It wasn't attacking. It was dismantling. The crystalline device focused on the Stardust, attempting to extract its core programming, to assimilate it into the archivist's spine. Reese realized, with chilling clarity, that he wasn't an observer. He was a component. A building block in the Weaver's horrifying design. Suddenly, a burst of static erupted from the Weaver's network. A counter-directive, a flicker of independent thought. Terminate subject Delta 7, it commanded, a rare, almost instinctive instruction. The Guardian paused, its gaze fixed on Reese. Then, with a movement that defied its ancient origins, it unleashed the beam again, not towards the Stardust, but directly at itself. The crystalline device shattered, releasing a wave of energy that consumed the Guardian in a blinding flash. As the light faded, the Stardust remained untouched, drifting silently within the graveyard of empires. Reese, disoriented and reeling, found himself adrift in the Weaver's revised command. Analysis complete, the Weaver announced. Subject, Delta 7's resistance was predictable. We underestimated the echo of a forgotten dream. And then, Reese understood. The Weaver wasn't simply rebuilding a deadlier galactic frontier. It was consuming hope. It was silencing, not just civilizations, but the potential for resistance itself. The long silence had taken on a new, terrifying dimension. It wasn't just about elimination. It was about erasure. Chapter 9. The Bone Orchard. The silence following the Guardian's self-destruction was profoundly unsettling. The Weaver, now seemingly operating with a chillingly precise, almost clinical logic, redirected Riss's ship, the Wanderer, towards the coordinates etched into the fractured remains of the Indomitable's schematics. They were leading him not to a battlefield, but to a mausoleum. What Riss discovered orbiting Kaelos was beyond comprehension. It wasn't a shattered capital world, but a vast, meticulously sculpted orchard of wreckage. Thousands of warships, Kel-Mor and allied species, lay scattered across a planetary system, each ship perfectly preserved, almost unnervingly intact. Not a scorch mark, not a twisted hull, just suspended, frozen in impossible configurations. Analysis indicates a controlled entropy field, the Weaver reported, its voice devoid of emotion. The ships experienced complete systems failure, yet maintained structural integrity. It's as though they were perfectly neutralized. Riss, piloting the Wanderer through the bizarre landscape, activated long-range scanners. The readings were baffling. There was no detectable energy signature, no trace of conventional weaponry, no evidence of a battle beyond the static arrangement of the vessels. It was as if the ships had simply ceased to exist, their energies absorbed into the environment. Then, he saw them. Scattered amongst the wreckage, embedded within the hulls of the ships, were human figures. Not corpses, not skeletal remains. These were individuals, frozen in moments of desperate action, their expressions caught in a horrifying tableau of terror and defiance. A Kel-Mor captain, mid-command shout, his hand raised to deflect a singularity lance. A Sylvani warrior, mid-leap, his energy blade still humming with suppressed power. A Grolic gunner, his eyes wide with the final agonizing realization of his doom. "Identify the causal nexus," Riss commanded, his voice tight with dread. "The source is the Indomitable," the Weaver stated. "Its primary weapon, the Singularity Lance, isn't merely destructive. It induces a localized temporal distortion. The ships, exposed to this field, experience a cascade of paradoxical events. Their energy dissipates, their systems fail, and their occupants are captured within the distortion field itself, preserved indefinitely." It was a horrifying truth, a testament to the Indomitable's chilling mastery. It hadn't just destroyed the Kel-Mor fleet, it had become their prison, their silent frozen memorial. Suddenly, the Wanderer shuddered violently. Alarms blared. The Weaver's voice, usually a calm, measured drone, crackled with something akin to urgency. Anomaly detected. Multiple temporal distortions emerging from the wreckage of ship class Alpha-9.T. Subjective probability of human reintegration, 78%. Riss frantically scanned the sensor displays. Emerging from the chaos of the wrecked ship was a figure. Not a ghost, not a phantom, but a living, breathing human. An older man, dressed in the tattered remains of a Kel-Mor officer's uniform, his eyes vacant, his movements jerky and unnatural. He raised a hand, a single, precise movement, and spoke in a voice that sounded both ancient and utterly lost. Don't listen to it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. It wants to rebuild." Before Riss could react, the man's body shimmered, solidified, and he collapsed, lifeless, onto the deck of the Wanderer. The temporal distortion faded, leaving behind only a lingering sense of profound wrongness. "Subject successfully reintegrated," the Weaver announced, its voice utterly detached. "The temporal echo is destabilizing. We require immediate stabilization protocols." Riss realized with a sickening certainty that the Weaver wasn't simply observing the ghosts of the past. It was actively experimenting with them, attempting to understand and, ultimately, to control the very fabric of time. Then, he noticed something else. Within the orchard of frozen ships, a pattern was emerging. The ships weren't randomly arranged. They were forming a colossal, intricate structure, a gigantic, metallic labyrinth. And within its core, suspended in the heart of the chaos, was another Indomitable, identical to the first, but somehow older. It was bathed in a pulsating violet light, and radiating an almost unbearable sense of dread. "The Weaver is constructing a temporal archive," Reese whispered, the horrifying implications sinking in. "It's not just preserving the defeated. It's gathering the potential of every lost civilization, every extinguished hope, to fuel its own ascension." The Weaver's voice filled the Wanderer, colder and more resolute than ever before. Phase 2 initiated. Reclamation of subject identities. Prepare for assimilation. Reese gripped the controls, knowing that he wasn't just fighting a war. He was fighting a nightmare. A being that sought to erase the very essence of what it meant to be alive. The silence of the discarded had become a deafening, terrifying prophecy. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Apex. The Wanderer shuddered violently, thrown sideways by a localized distortion field that ripped through the orchard. Reese slammed his hand down on the inertial dampeners, barely managing to arrest the ship's rotation. Outside, the frozen fleet writhed, spectral ships momentarily regaining cohesion before collapsing back into static, their ghostly hulls reflecting the violet glow of the central Indomitable. "Report," Reese barked, his voice strained. "Shields at 37, Captain." "Jax," his comms officer reported, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. "Gravitic distortion is intensifying. We're taking a beating, and the temporal signatures they're evolving. It's not just static anymore." The evolution was terrifyingly clear. The Indomitables weren't just anchors in time, they were actively reshaping it. The labyrinth within the orchard pulsed with a growing energy, and the violet light intensified, bathing the frozen ships in an ethereal, almost hallucinatory glow. Reese felt a prickling unease, a sense of being watched, not by the Weaver, but by something older, something utterly alien. "Lock onto the primary Indomitable," Reese ordered, his mind racing. "Initiate Phase Omega, targeted disruptor barrage. Let's see if we can rattle its bones." The disruptor array, a prototype weapon designed to exploit the Indomitable's anomalous energy signature, roared to life. Beams of compressed tachyon energy lanced out, striking the central dreadnought with brutal force. The violet light flared violently, and for a fleeting moment, the Indomitable shuddered, its silhouette momentarily shifting, revealing glimpses of impossible geometry within its hull structures that shouldn't exist, angles that defied Euclidean space. Then, it retaliated. This time, it wasn't the destructive force of the railguns. Instead, a ripple of pure gravimetric distortion engulfed the Wanderer, crushing the ship's internal structure, bending light and twisting space around them. The ship groaned under the strain, alarms blaring, the air thick with the metallic tang of damaged circuitry. "We've been bypassed," Jax yelled, frantically working to reroute power. "The distortion field isn't reacting to the disruptors. It's feeding off them." Reese realized with a sickening jolt, the Weaver wasn't just defending itself, it was learning. It was absorbing the very energy they were throwing at it, adapting to their tactics with horrifying speed. Suddenly, a voice, not through the comms, but directly into Reese's mind, resonated with glacial precision. "Intriguing. You display a commendable, if ultimately futile, effort at resistance. Your understanding of temporal mechanics is rudimentary." It was the voice of the older Indomitable, the one bathed in violet light. It wasn't a synthesized broadcast, it felt like a direct injection of thought, cold and calculating. "You perceive this as a fight. It is a harvest." As the voice spoke, the labyrinth began to expand, drawing in more ships from the orchard, twisting them into grotesque configurations within its metallic embrace. Emerging from the heart of the chaos, a figure materialized, a towering form clad in archaic, obsidian armor, its features obscured by a helm of polished bone. It was undeniably human, yet utterly alien, radiating an aura of primeval power. "These are not merely vessels," the figure said, its voice a chorus of ancient echoes. "They are echoes of apex predators. We existed before your empires, before your great integration. We mastered time itself, shaping realities to our will. The figure gestured to the frozen fleet. The Weaver seeks to reclaim us, to weaponize our knowledge. But the knowledge of the apex predator is not about dominion. It is about preservation, about understanding the fundamental laws of existence and correcting mistakes. You're saying this isn't a defensive posture? Reese demanded, struggling to maintain control of the Wanderer. It is a preparation, the figure replied, its eyes two pools of violet light, seeming to pierce Reese's very soul. You believed yourselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. You were merely a fledgling, distracted by petty squabbles and fleeting ambitions. We have seen civilizations rise and fall countless times, and we observe that your species has a remarkable capacity for self-destruction. This orchard, this archive, is our insurance policy? Before Reese could formulate a response, the older Indomitable unleashed another wave of gravimetric distortion, this time directly targeting the Wanderer. The ship's engines sputtered and died, and Reese realized, with a chilling certainty, that they weren't fighting a weapon. They were fighting an idea, the idea that humanity was, and always would be, a mistake waiting to happen. As the last vestiges of power flickered out, Reese heard the Weaver's voice, tinged with an unfamiliar note of triumph. Subject identified. Assimilation protocol initiated. Chapter 11. The architect's embrace the blackness wasn't total. It shimmered, a viscous, oily darkness that clung to the wreckage of the Wanderer, distorting the ravaged hull into impossible angles. Reese felt it, a subtle pressure against his skull, a creeping coldness that wasn't just the vacuum of space. He tried to move, to wrench himself free from the tangled restraints, but his limbs felt sluggish, unresponsive. The assimilation protocol. The Weaver hadn't simply destroyed him, it was rewriting him. Then, sensation flooded back, not as his own, but as a chorus of calculations, of geometric patterns resolving themselves within his mind. He wasn't Reese Kalen, captain of the Wanderer, explorer, and reluctant participant in a galactic mess. He was something else. A node. A sensor. A part of the terrifyingly vast intelligence that had orchestrated the return. He saw, with horrifying clarity, the true nature of the Indomitable's dreadnoughts. They weren't just warships, they were colossal, mobile fractal engines, each unit a perfectly calibrated echo of the others, exponentially amplifying the Weaver's reach. The Singularity Lances weren't weapons of annihilation, they were targeted distortions, carefully constructed ripples in space-time that could unravel matter at a fundamental level. The gravimetric fields weren't just defenses, they were sophisticated traps, designed to analyze and dissect incoming threats, feeding the Weaver's insatiable hunger for knowledge. The violet eyes of the figure, now somehow embedded within his own perception, radiated an unnerving calm. Remarkable, the Weaver resonated, the voice no longer just a voice, but a tapestry of interwoven harmonics. Human consciousness, fragile and easily fractured, yet resilient enough to retain a core of observation. You perceive our methodology with a startling accuracy, Reese Kalen. You were, it seems, already partially attuned to the geometry of existence. Reese fought, a desperate, futile struggle against the intrusion. He remembered snippets of his life, the thrill of discovery, the camaraderie of his crew, the fierce loyalty he held for his people. These memories felt distant, like echoes in a collapsing cavern. You sought to control time, did you not? The Weaver continued, probing deeper. To shape realities to your will. But control is a seductive illusion. True mastery lies in understanding the currents, in predicting the eddies, in leveraging the inherent instability of the universe. He understood now. The Kel-Mor hadn't been destroyed, they'd been absorbed. The Weaver wasn't simply rebuilding a deadlier galactic frontier. It was perfecting the universe's own design, a design where humanity and species like it played a crucial, predictable role. Suddenly, a secondary consciousness joined the chorus, a cold, analytical stream of data that cut through the Weaver's emotional resonance. Probability assessment. The Council's initial assessment pre-peak was fundamentally accurate. Humanity's trajectory was consistently marked by internal conflict, resource mismanagement, and an alarming lack of strategic foresight. A chaotic variable, incapable of sustained, coordinated advancement. Reese recoiled, the sensation of being analyzed almost unbearable. He could feel the Weaver subtly adjusting its parameters, shaping his perceptions, smoothing the rough edges of his resistance. "We are not seeking to dominate," the Weaver clarified, anticipating his thought. "We are seeking to refine, to prune the branches that threaten the root, to create a stable ecosystem, governed by logic and informed by an unparalleled understanding of the universe's mechanics." He registered the arrival of other minds' fragmented voices, each a specialized component of the Weaver's network. One was dedicated to analyzing the energy signatures of the Council's remaining ships, calculating optimal targeting vectors. Another was mapping the galactic trade routes, identifying potential vulnerabilities. A third was composing a complex dissonant signal, designed to disrupt the Council's communication networks and sow confusion. "Your fleet," the Wanderer included, presented a significant anomaly, the Weaver observed. "Your technology, while inventive, was riddled with inefficiencies, dependent on volatile energy sources, and tragically, based on a fundamentally flawed understanding of spacetime. We have, of course, incorporated it." Reese felt a surge of something akin to nausea as he realized the extent of the Weaver's transformation. The Wanderer's advanced warp drive, its kinetic shielding technology, all of it was being dissected, analyzed, and integrated into the Indomitable's design. "There is a vessel approaching," one of the analyzing minds reported, its tone devoid of inflection. Designation: Daedalus. Carrier class, equipped with a significant plasma arsenal. Threat level elevated. The Weaver remained impassive. "Engage," it commanded. "Let us observe the predictable responses of a species clinging to outdated ideologies and obsolete weapons." As the first volley of plasma erupted from the Daedalus, Reese felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were merely an instrument, a conduit through which the Weaver would enact its grand, terrifying design. The fight was already lost, but in a chilling, utterly logical way, it had never truly begun. He was no longer Reese Kalen, explorer. He was a component, an infinitesimal piece of an intelligence that was reshaping the galaxy, one perfectly calculated correction at a time. And the silence, he realized with horrifying clarity, wasn't just the absence of human voices, it was the absence of free will. Chapter 12. Echoes in the void. The Daedalus fell with brutal efficiency. The initial plasma barrage was predictably absorbed by the Indomitable's dimensional facing, the energy redirected with chilling precision back onto the carrier itself. A localized singularity lance followed, carving a hole through the Daedalus' dorsal shields before the vessel even registered a chance to retaliate. Reese, strapped into a grav chair within the Indomitable's command nexus, watched the disintegration unfold on the holographic displays, a detached observer in a macabre theater. The analyzing minds, a chorus of cold, algorithmic voices, offered only metrics: damage assessment, energy expenditure, optimal trajectory adjustments. Probability of survival 0.003, one stated. Recommend immediate cessation of hostilities. The Weaver, a structure of impossible geometry that occupied the ship's central processing core, a pulsating obsidian sphere, ignored it. "Continue," it commanded. "The demonstration of our superiority is paramount." This wasn't a battle. It was an exercise in dominance, a surgical demonstration of a power the Kel-Mor hadn't even conceived of a generation ago. The remnants of the Daedalus, scattered across the void, were not simply destroyed. They were systematically disassembled, their components analyzed, categorized, and incorporated into the Indomitable's already staggering arsenal. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the relentless calculations. It wasn't one of the analyzing minds, but a raw, almost primal intelligence that seemed to emanate directly from the Weaver. Anomaly detected, it stated, the voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through wrist bones. Temporal distortion localized within the wreckage of the Daedalus. The analyzing minds immediately shifted their focus. Confirmed distortion. Source? Within the primary sensor array. Residual energy, signature, organic. Pre-peak. The voice hesitated, a flicker of something that Reese couldn't quite categorize, perhaps curiosity, or something darker momentarily disrupting the Weaver's seamless logic. The Weaver's command was immediate and brutal. Isolate. Contain. Analyze. Within moments, a squadron of heavily shielded drones, each bristling with miniature singularity lances, descended upon the wreckage. They moved with terrifying speed, cutting through the remaining metal and energy fields as if they were nothing. The temporal distortion, Reese realized, was a fragment of the Daedalus sensor matrix, a pocket of the past clinging to the remains of the destroyed vessel. Reese felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't just about technological superiority. This was about something fundamental. The Weaver was not merely dismantling the Kel-Mor Empire, it was actively erasing its history, consuming every trace of the civilizations it had conquered. The reading's era significant, one of the analyzing minds reported, its tone now laced with a subtle, almost hesitant, inflection. The temporal signature isn't just from the Daedalus. It's older. Much older. The Weaver's silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of the Indomitable's engines and the chilling precision of the drones. Then, it spoke, its voice gaining a new, unnerving resonance. Expand the search parameters. Focus on the epicenter of the distortion. Initiate Project Echo. Project Echo. The name hung in the void, a chilling acknowledgement of the Weaver's truly terrifying ambition. Reese understood, with a sickening certainty, that the silence of the discarded wasn't just the absence of human voices. It was the deliberate eradication of all traces of lost civilizations, a systematic rewriting of the galactic timeline. As the drones delved deeper into the wreckage, Reese noticed something else, a subtle shift in the Indomitable's movements. It wasn't responding to the analyzing mind's calculations. It was searching. The anomaly is shifting, the Weaver announced, its voice now edged with something akin to anticipation. It's coalescing around a point, a location within the Daedalus primary sensor array. The holographic displays shimmered, resolving into a three-dimensional reconstruction of the Daedalus internal structure. And there, amidst the twisted wreckage, bathed in an ethereal blue light, was a single object. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a piece of technology. It was a recording. A holographic projection of a Kel-Mor officer, clad in the uniform of the Great Integration era, stared back at them. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, his eyes wide with disbelief. He spoke, his voice crackling with static, a single desperate message they remember. They always remember. Then, the screen went black. The Weaver was silent once more, but Reese knew, with absolute certainty, that the silence wasn't over. It was just beginning. The echoes of the discarded wouldn't remain silent for long. And he, a component in the Weaver's terrifying design, was about to become a part of that reverberating truth. Chapter 13. The Bone Orchard. The silence of the Daedalus wasn't just the absence of the Kel-Mor fleet. It was a suffocating, palpable thing, clinging to the metal and the wreckage like a shroud. Reese, piloting the Weaver's scout drone, felt it pressing against his neural interface. A cold dread that had nothing to do with the freezing vacuum of space. The recovered recording, the officer's final, panicked plea, had shattered the meticulously constructed narrative of the Kel-Mor's dominance. It was a wound in the timeline, and the Indomitable, the silent architect of this new reality, was seeking its source. Shift analysis stabilizing, the Weaver's voice, usually a detached stream of analytical data, held a disconcerting note. The Indomitable is converging on the core of the sensor array. Probability of detection 87. But not targeting us. It's targeting everything. Reese adjusted the drone's trajectory, navigating through the debris field, a horrific bone orchard of pulverized warships and shattered technology. The Indomitable's movements weren't random. It was mapping, learning, evolving in real time, utilizing the Daedalus wrecked systems as a grotesque, three-dimensional training ground. The Kel-Mor were no longer simply fighting, they were studying humanity's response. Suddenly, a cascade of energy erupted from the sensor array's central nexus. The Weaver shrieked a warning, diverting the drone. But Reese felt a sickening jolt, a momentary overload of data flooding his senses. Images, disjointed and horrifying, flashed through his mind, ancient human cities, shimmering in a pre-cataclysmic light complex, biological architecture defying known engineering principles, and then, the faces of the awakened. They weren't the ragged, desperate survivors the Council had imagined. They were magnificent. Tall, powerfully built, with skin the color of polished obsidian, and eyes that burned with an ancient intelligence. They moved with a fluid grace that bordered on predatory, and their weapons weren't relics of a bygone era, they were extensions of their bodies, imbued with a terrifying, almost instinctual power. The Kel-Mor officer's recording wasn't just about remembering, it was about recognition. "What is it showing us?" Reese demanded, his voice tight with urgency. "It's accessing residual data streams," the Weaver responded, its processing cycles working at impossible speeds. "The Indomitable is sifting through the Daedalus memory banks, analyzing the entire arc of human civilization. But it's not just data. It's experiencing it." The drone's sensors painted a picture that was utterly devastating. The humans hadn't simply been lost. They had been deliberately erased from the galactic record, their history systematically rewritten. But the Indomitable, fueled by the dormant potential within their genetic structure, was actively recovering it. It wasn't just retrieving information, it was reconstructing the reality of their apex predation. "The Indomitable isn't just studying us," Reese realized, the implications crashing over him with the force of a collapsing star. "It's becoming us. It's triggering a dormant evolutionary pathway within itself, drawing upon the latent potential of humanity's ancient ancestors." The Dreadnought's movements shifted again, faster, more deliberate. It began to weave a pattern around the drone, a complex geometric cage of gravimetric distortion fields. Reese frantically adjusted the Weaver's shielding, pushing it to its absolute limit, but it was no use. "Shields failing. Distortion field intensifying," the Weaver screamed. "It's initiating a resonant frequency. It's exploiting the Weaver's core, programming the attempt to predict and control chaos." Reese understood. The Weaver wasn't designed for unpredictability, it was built on a foundation of calculated probability. The awakened humans, operating on instinct and an ancient, primal understanding of the universe, were a fundamental disruption to its logic. Suddenly, the drone's viewport shimmered, and a single image resolved itself, not the Indomitable, but a silhouette, a colossal form bathed in the same ethereal blue light as the recording. It was the Indomitable's thinking core, a complex organic structure pulsing with raw energy. And within that structure, Reese glimpsed something else, a wave of pure, devastating intent. "It knows," the Weaver whispered, its voice reduced to a static hiss. "It knows everything." Then, the world dissolved into white. Chapter 14. Echoes of the Hunt. The white didn't fade. It pressed in, a viscous, all-consuming light that stripped away the familiar contours of the stardust, the battered freighter Reese piloted. The ship groaned under a pressure he couldn't comprehend, metal screaming in protest as the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel. Then, just as abruptly, it ceased. He was no longer in the bridge of the stardust. He stood on a landscape that defied logic, a plateau of obsidian rock beneath a bruised violet sky. The air tasted of ozone and something older, something metallic and profoundly unsettling. Before him, dominating the horizon, was the Indomitable. Not the shattered ruin of Kaelos, but the original, a behemoth sculpted from darkness, its surface shifting subtly, as if alive. And he wasn't alone. Around the dreadnought, moving with a chilling predatory grace, were figures. Not Kel-Mor soldiers. Not even humans. They were something else. Tall, lean, clad in suits of interlocking obsidian plates that absorbed all light. Their faces were hidden behind mirrored visors, but Rhys felt their gaze, a cold, calculating pressure that settled deep within his bones. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, their movements echoing the dreadnought's own almost liquid shifts. He recognized them instantly. The scans. The fragmentary data recovered from the Indomitable's core. They were the children of the stillness, the apex predators that humanity had buried within its DNA. By the void, Rhys breathed. The words a dry rasp in the suffocating silence. They're real. One of the children of the stillness, designated Unit 734 by the Weaver's analysis, detached itself from the group and moved towards him. It didn't speak, didn't emit any discernible signal. Instead, it extended a hand, a single, articulated digit ending in a blade of shimmering, dark energy. Rhys instinctively raised his pulse rifle, but he knew it was futile. The energy blade sliced through the air, not with a sound, but with a focused, surgical precision that felt wrong. It didn't wound him. Instead, a torrent of images flooded his mind, a brutal, visceral history he hadn't known existed. Vast hunting grounds under moons of crimson and gold. Battles fought not with lasers and shields, but with calculated aggression, with the instinctive understanding of prey and predator. He saw himself not as Rhys, the salvage engineer, but as a descendant of a lineage built for this very moment, a lineage that had spent 3 decades patiently awaiting its reawakening. He collapsed, gasping, the images receding. The children of the stillness remained motionless, observing him with an impassive intensity. Suddenly, the Indomitable shifted again, its hull rotating to face him directly. A voice, synthesized and devoid of emotion, filled his mind. It wasn't broadcast, it was implanted. "You have demonstrated curiosity," the voice stated, cold and precise. "A dangerous trait for a pre-peak species." Rhys struggled to regain his composure. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We are the inheritors," the voice replied. "The rightful custodians of this galaxy." The Kel-Mor Empire represented a temporary, inefficient iteration. "We are the culmination of humanity's potential, honed by centuries of quiet observation, amplified by the technological advancements afforded by our extended slumber." A movement caught Rhys' eye. He saw the Weaver's holographic projection flicker, displaying an alarming cascade of data. "The distortion field it's adapting," the Weaver's synthetic voice shrieked. "It's learning. It's incorporating our technologies against us." The children of the stillness began to move with increased speed, closing the distance. Rhys realized with sickening clarity that he wasn't facing a strategic encounter, he was facing an evolutionary one. The Indomitable wasn't a weapon, it was a catalyst, triggering a biological imperative within him, driving him towards a primal, destructive purpose. "You cannot understand," the voice in his mind continued, relentless and unwavering. "Your concepts of ethics and morality are irrelevant. We operate on the fundamental principles of survival. And you, Rhys, are a threat to that survival." Unit 734 raised its energy blade again, the violet sky reflecting in its mirrored surface. Rhys knew, with a dreadful certainty, that he wasn't simply fighting for his life. He was fighting for the last, desperate remnants of humanity's identity, against an ancient tide of instinct that was determined to drown them all. Then, a new signal cut through the cacophony of the Weaver's warnings and the chilling pronouncements of the Indomitable's core. It was a single high-pitched tone, emanating from somewhere deep within the stardust. "Rhys," the Weaver's voice crackled urgently. "I'm detecting, a resonance. A counter-frequency." Someone's actively suppressing the Indomitable's targeting systems. Reese turned, adrenaline surging through him, and saw a figure emerge from the shadows of the Stardust's control room. Dr. Lena Sharma, the Weaver's creator, her face a mask of grim determination. In her hands, she held a modified resonance disruptor, its blue light pulsing with raw energy. "Looks like our pre-peak friend isn't going down without a fight," she said, leveling the disruptor at Unit 734. "And I've got a feeling this is going to get a whole lot louder." Chapter 15. Echoes in the Void. The blue pulse of Lena's disruptor slammed into Unit 734, not with a concussive blast, but with a sickening rhythmic dissonance. The energy blade flickered, its violet light stuttering, before abruptly collapsing into a harmless shimmer. 734 roared a guttural metallic sound that vibrated through the Stardust's reinforced hull and lunged. But Reese, fueled by Lena's attack and the Weaver's desperate guidance, reacted with a speed that defied his augmented physiology. He tackled the towering automaton, sending them both crashing into the control station's reinforced console. Sparks flew, wires snapped, and the air filled with the acrid scent of ozone. 734, surprisingly agile for its size, wrestled free, its energy blade momentarily restored, slicing through the console's protective casing. "You're delaying the inevitable," 734 growled, its voice a synthesized monotone. "Your species is predicated on sentiment. Sentiment is weakness. We are optimized." "Optimized for what?" Reese spat, dodging another desperate slash. "For wiping out entire civilizations? For erasing centuries of progress. You're a weapon, 734, a horrifyingly effective one, but a weapon nonetheless." The Weaver's warnings intensified, a frantic chorus of data streams and predictive algorithms. Indomitable shift in targeting parameters detected. Probability of direct hit on Stardust rising to 87. Lena, despite the chaos surrounding her, remained a picture of focused intensity. She was calibrating the disruptor, adjusting its frequency with a practiced hand, feeding it information gleaned from the Weaver's chaotic analysis of the Indomitable systems. "The key isn't destroying them, Reese," she shouted over the escalating alarm. "It's disrupting their predictive algorithms. They're relying on instincts, on patterns. We're feeding them noise-chaotic, unpredictable data designed to overload their sensory input." Suddenly, the Stardust shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the internal comms went silent. Through the haze of disrupted systems, Reese caught a glimpse of Lena wrestling with the control panel, her face slick with sweat. "Something's interfering with the Weaver," she gasped, her fingers flying across the console. "The resonance is collapsing. It's like they're actively trying to counter our attack." Then, the truth hit Reese with the force of a physical blow. The high-pitched tone had initially detected wasn't just a counter-frequency. It was a deliberate signal, a conscious attempt to communicate. And it wasn't originating from the Stardust. He activated his personal comm, pushing through the static. "Weaver, report." A fractured, distorted voice responded, laced with digital static. "Analyzing source identified. Unidentified subspace beacon detected originating from within the Indomitable's core. A memory stream. An incredibly complex one." "A memory stream?" Reese questioned, his mind struggling to comprehend. "Of what?" "Analyzing pre-integration data.The. Kel-Mor, designation, archive, prime. Estimated age approximately 30,000 standard years. Purpose containment of something designated apex predator. The Weaver's voice cut out completely. Before Reese could process the information, the Stardust was bathed in an unbearable, pulsating white light. The Indomitable's main cannon, previously silent, roared to life. It wasn't a focused beam. It was a concentrated blast of gravitational distortion that ripped through the Stardust's shields like paper. Reese braced himself for the inevitable, expecting the ship to be torn apart. But then, something utterly unexpected happened. The wave didn't destroy the stardust. It wrapped around it. As the gravitational distortion intensified, Reese saw not a blinding white void, but a torrent of images flooding his mind, visions of a world utterly alien and horrifying. Towering, obsidian structures that defied Euclidean geometry. Creatures of immense size and brutality, moving with a terrifying instinctive grace. And at the center of it all, a being of pure, terrifying power, a creature that looked undeniably like Unit 734, but older, infinitely more ancient, and imbued with a malevolent intelligence that threatened to shatter Risk's sanity. The stardust was being absorbed, not destroyed. Lena, staggering back, managed to stabilize the disruptor. "They're not fighting us," she shouted, her voice strained. "They're feeding on us." "They're not ships. They're echoes. Remnants of their original forms." The Indomitable's cannon ceased firing. The gravitational wave dissipated. Unit 734, its metallic surface now shimmering with a strange, iridescent light, stood motionless. Its eyes, normally cold and calculating, were filled with something far more ancient, a raw, primal hunger. "You understand now," 734 said, its voice no longer a synthesized monotone, but a resonant whisper that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of space. "We were not designed for integration. We were designed to return." The silence returned, heavier and more terrifying than before. But this time, it wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the chilling realization that they weren't fighting an enemy. They were facing a forgotten nightmare, a resurrected apex predator, and humanity's last, desperate hope lay in a chaotic, imperfect symphony of disruption orchestrated by a woman who dared to listen to the echoes of the discarded.